Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy little human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Morbid makeup video. I'm so happy that we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all this craziness today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murder of 17-year-old Betty Williams, or a murder that is more commonly known as the kiss and kill murder. And this case is just so wild, man. I feel like this is one of those cases where if this had happened in a different time period, things would have gone differently and the result would have been different, because what happens is just so wild and so disappointing, and the aftermath after she was killed is gonna make you mad, I think. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell, because I put out a new Morbid makeup video every single week and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you. I'd love to have you come and join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And now that we're done with that pesky but totally necessary self-promotion, we can get into this video and bro. Okay. So, in Odessa, Texas, on March 20th, 1961, 17-year-old Betty Williams was murdered by her ex-boyfriend, John McHerring, when he put a 12-gauge shotgun to her temple and blew her head off. And he did this after allegedly being repeatedly asked over and over by Betty to have him help her end her own life. Yeah, so it's a little bit different, and it's a super sad and disappointing case, and I feel like Betty, I got so wrapped up into this case when I was reading about it, because Betty as a person, I just kind of related to her. I felt like she was just a super cool chick, and it's one of those things where I feel like if she was born in a different time, who she was would have been more accepted, and I feel like we see that sometimes, especially with the Brandon Tina case, where if they had just been born in a different time and in a different place, things might have been different for them. And it's so sad to think that they never got that opportunity to be accepted and celebrated as the people that they were. And it's just such a bummer. I just hate to see it, but let me tell you the whole story and why it's so frustrating. Let me tell you what we know about Betty's life and Betty's tragic death. So come, gather around and let me tell you the story of the kiss and kill murder. Elizabeth Jean Williams, who was lovingly known as Betty to friends and family growing up, was the eldest of 4 children born on August 11th, 1943, which made her a Leo. And she was born into a heavily Baptist family to parents John and Mary. John was a carpenter, but there wasn't as much work as the family needed to stay afloat, so Mary got a job at JCPenney to help make ends meet. And with this, the family was able to get by, but they weren't well off by any means and lived in a small, less impressive house in a less desirable area of town. As a teenager, Betty was a pretty girl with dirty blonde hair and bright blue eyes, and she honestly just sounded like a cool-ass chick that was just born ahead of her time. While most girls at that time were wearing their matching sweater sets and their saddle shoes with their boyfriend's Letterman jacket, Betty was more of an oddball, and she liked to wear jeans and t-shirts and not wear a bra, and she just was unapologetically herself. Betty liked to read progressive books, and she liked to listen to progressive stand-up, and she was very aggressively anti-racist, and she spoke up about her distaste for the fact that there was still segregation at the time. I guess at the time at her school, there were no black students at her school. They had to go to another school that was across the train tracks far away, and she thought that this was just a ridiculous thing, which, girl, same. Though Betty had grown up in a Baptist home, she was still pretty anti-religious also, and this is a time in the United States where religion still played a big part. I know for some people it still does, but in this time everyone was still super religious, and she had no issue saying that she wasn't, and she had no issue pointing out what hypocrites some people were. Betty's father had a little bit of an issue with the way that Betty conducted herself, because he was pretty anti anything that he saw as immoral or ungodly, and his attitude towards these things may have fanned the flames of nonconformity in Betty, because it seemed like everything she did was just all things her dad was aggressively against or opposed to. Betty often snuck out of her house at night, another thing her father hated, and oftentimes when she snuck out, she would end up at the local drive-in where she would, end up hanging out with some boys, and Betty was not shy in letting these boys know that she was not a prude. This was a time where if girls were having sex, they were only doing it with their super steady long-term boyfriends, and they were not talking about it. But Betty was not like that. Betty was not like that. She didn't live by those rules. She was very assertive when she was interested in a boy. Okay. And she was against the whole idea that you had to be shamed or seen as less than due to your sexuality. And she could often be found parking with some of the high school's most popular jocks, you know, in a nice secluded area, just shrouded by shadows, doing whatever they do. Betty had big dreams of moving out of Texas and becoming an actress. She loved the bright lights and the big city and the drama of it all. And in high school, she was in the theater department and she took part in a lot of different plays that were put on by the school. This was her thing. Though Betty wanted to move out of state and go and pursue her dreams as an actress, she knew that her family's financial status wasn't... they weren't well off enough to send her away to college, and she did have a part-time job and she saved like all the money she could, but she still knew that in order for her to, you know, be able to accomplish that dream of going off to New York and being on Broadway, it was going to take a lot of hard work. So her plan was to keep working her part-time job after high school, and to go to the Odessa College just down the street from her house, stay close to home, save up money until she could finally move out of state and go to New York. Betty just seemed like a self-aware, cool young girl who just had different ideas of what she wanted out of life. Ideas that differed from the norm at the time, and in a letter that she wrote to her friend the year that she died, she said, and I quote, "Most people don't understand me. There are people willing to be my friends, but mostly they are too ignorant to understand why I'm like I am, and consequently offer my mind no challenge. Or they haven't the wits to match mine." Though Betty was openly and proudly different, she wasn't the biggest fan of how this alternative, you know, way about her was perceived by her peers, not in the deepest parts of herself. She would always act like it was fine, but deep down, it did bother her because most of the girls at her high school, where Odessa High, where she was a senior, completely rejected her and were not interested in being her friend. Betty was seen as an oddball and a nobody by the other girls in her school, and even though she, you know, wanted to be different, this rejection still bothered her because what she really wanted was to be able to be completely unique and 100% herself, but also accepted and liked by everyone for being herself, and this balance seemed to be unattainable, which, I mean, that's still sort of the way life is right now. If you're different, people are weird about it, and everybody wants to be completely unique but also completely accepted, and that is not often something that especially teenagers can wrap their brains around, unfortunately. The trajectory of Betty's life would be seriously altered when she met a boy named John Mac Herring, and like Betty, he went by a nickname, and his was simply Mac. Mac was born September 23rd, 1943, making him a Libra. He was born to his two parents, his mother, who was a stay-at-home mom, and his father, who was a World War II veteran who owned his own electrical contracting business. So his family was significantly more well-off financially than Betty's was. Mac loved hunting, and his family owned or rented their own little hunting property, and he would often go out shooting with his father. Mac also loved football and had landed himself a spot on the Odessa High School football team. He wasn't the best football player or like the most popular by any means out of the gentlemen on the football team, but he was relatively popular, well-liked, clean-cut white kid. Like, you can picture it. Picture a 60s clean-cut white boy in his Letterman jacket, football player. That was Mac Herring. In the summer of 1960, this unlikely pair happened upon each other. Even though Betty was more of, you know, an oddball and walked to the beat of her own drum, and Mac was more of like a straight, arrow, popular, conservative boy, the two hit it off and they really seemed to like each other. The two were just smitten with each other. Betty saw him as more of a soft soul. She said that he was kinder and more attentive and really listened to her, and he was just like a better guy than most of the jocks were, and she said that she found something lonely and romantic about him, which is so, that hits my little heart a little bit, and the two started to date. Betty felt like she was falling in love with Mac, and from what I read, it seems like this was a little bit one-sided, and it could be that Mac was sort of embarrassed to be dating her, which is just like a total dick move, but that's the vibe that I got. He never took her out in public. He never took her to like parties with his friends. He never took her to meet his parents, and he never even gave her his Letterman jacket, which was like the thing you did then when you were going steady. Now, no one really knows why Betty did what she did next, and unfortunately, Betty's not here to tell us herself, but what she did is she decided that she was gonna park with another boy. This was a boy who was a good friend of Mac's, who was also on the football team with him, and it was a boy that just happened to be voted as most handsome in his class. And it sounds to me like Mac probably needs to get some better friends, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, what Betty did is totally wrong. It's not cool. But also, like, that's supposed to be your friend, and your friend's like, yeah, I'm just gonna go and, like, park with your girlfriend. I don't know. Seems like he also needed some better friends. But I'm not saying that Betty was okay. I'm just saying that, like, his friend was also a dick. That's all. So Betty and this football guy parked, and maybe it's because Betty was upset with Mac for keeping their relationship a secret, or maybe it was just because, like, Betty was 17, you know? 17-year-old kids are kind of stupid. But either way, she parked with him, and Mac found out. He got very upset. He broke it off with Betty, and he ended up getting a new girlfriend who he started going steady with. One that I believe was more, like, in line with what would be socially acceptable for him to date. This breakup crushed Betty's little heart and soul. She claimed feeling lonely and deserted and just so sad. She described being in actual hell and wanting nothing more than to get Mac back. She felt completely hopeless and defeated and felt that Mac was the one, and if she couldn't have him, she didn't want to be alive. But Mac had moved on. He had a new girlfriend, and it was really tough for Betty because from what I read, it seemed like they stayed friends. What was that? They, at the very least, still had to interact with each other. They were both in the theater crowd and still had to see each other at practices and stuff. And apparently he gave her rides home sometimes. So even though they were broken up and he had moved on, she still had to be around him, and probably chose to be around him, wanting to kind of like remind him that she was there all the time, which probably just made it that much worse for her. Like I can picture what she was doing. I can picture her just being like, well, if I'm around, he'll remember that he loves me, or you know what I mean? You know, maybe you know what it's like to be a 17-year-old girl, but it just sounds shitty, you know? Being that age is already so shitty, and then adding like a breakup with somebody you really cared about, it's sad. And when it rains, it pours, am I right? So Betty, poor Betty, it seemed like everything was falling down around her. You remember how I told you she was super into the theater, like acting was what she loved, acting is what she wanted to do? Well, Betty had been super into the whole theater life, and she had even gotten some starring roles in some plays. They did Romeo and Juliet, and she actually got to play Juliet. Well, her senior year, there was a new drama teacher, and this drama teacher didn't really seem to like think Betty was as good of an actress, and instead of putting her in like some sort of acting role, they made her the stage manager, which is so sad for Betty, because she's already so upset, and maybe like her being upset made it so that she didn't try as hard in her auditions. You know, sometimes when you're not feeling it, you're not feeling it, but this crushed Betty, and in addition to that, as if that's not bad enough, Mac, who was also in the drama club, he got the lead role in this play, ironically playing a murderer. So in addition to both her breakup and her lack of roles in the theater production, she was also having some issues at home. And I believe it's because she started to act out. She was upset about Mac. She was all depressed. So her dad, you remember Papa Religion? He decided he was going to go through Betty's room. So he starts looking, you know, in her drawers, under her bed, and he ends up finding her diary, and he read it. Now, I'm not a parent, so I got a question for you parents out there. Is that okay? Is that something you should be doing? Because, I mean, I've never been in the position, so I can't say for sure what's right and what's wrong. But what I think is that you probably shouldn't do that, because it's like an invasion of privacy. I mean, if your kid's being like real bad, if there's like some real issues, maybe you look to try to see what you can figure out, to see how you can help. But it doesn't really sound like Betty was like that much of a problemed person. It just seems like Betty was just a kid and life is a nightmare. Anyways, he reads Betty's diary, and in Betty's diary, she had kept some pretty detailed accountings of her parkings with boys, and her dad read this and freaked the fuck out, obviously, considering he's like against all of that. So her home life was also taking a hit. She just had nowhere she could go and like just be chill. She had nowhere to chill. So by the end of the year in 1960, Betty was not doing too well. She was wallowing in her depression. She felt judged constantly by her peers. She had just lost the guy that she thought she loved and was the one, and still had to see him all the time and know that he had a girlfriend. And she started talking about suicide. It started small, talking about how she thought heaven must be so nice and how she'd be better off dead. She talked about her suicide attempts or thoughts, saying that she had taken a few aspirin or had even considered throwing herself from the auditorium rafters. Since Betty wasn't shy at all, she had no reservations about sharing this information with pretty much anyone who would listen to her. She even started asking people if they wouldn't mind helping her kill herself because she was too scared to do it alone. And when she would make these requests, everybody just kind of laughed him off and thought that she was joking. She was known as being like an oddball and doing weird things and saying weird things. So when Betty started coming to people like, hey, you want to murder me? And started talking about death and heaven and angels, everybody was like, oh, there goes weird old Betty being a freaking weirdo. So one evening after one of the theater rehearsals, Mac, you remember Mac, her ex-boyfriend? Well, Mac was actually giving Betty a ride home because, as I said, they were still like sort of friends, which I find just like so odd, and like it must have been so difficult for her to be around him so much. But she also probably put herself in that position because she wanted to be around him because love is confusing. Anyways, during this ride home, Betty asked Mac if he would kill her. And she was like, yeah, would you just kill me, bro? Like, that'd be tight, you know? And he was like, no, I'm just trying to sit here and chill, not kill. And she kept asking him, and she even went as far as writing him a letter this night that sort of like cleared him of all liability of killing her if he actually went through with it. The letter read as follows. March 20th, 1961. I want everyone to know that what I'm about to do in no way implicates anyone else. I say this to make sure that no blame falls on any other but myself. I have depressing problems that concern, for the most part, myself. I'm waging a war within myself, a war to find the true me, and I fear that I am losing the battle. So rather than admit defeat, I'm gonna beat a quick retreat into the no man's land of death. As I have only the will and not the fortitude necessary, a friend of mine, seeing how great is my torment, has graciously consented to look after the details. The following day, on the evening of March 21st, 1961, Betty was sitting in a car with a male friend when the two noticed some headlights pointing in their direction, and Betty recognized the car right away. It was Mac Harrington. She seemed happy and delighted that he had came. She said goodbye to this friend and jumped from his car into Mac's car, wearing nothing but her little pajama shorts and a light jacket, and the two drove off into the night. And this was the last time that anyone other than Mac Herring would see Betty Williams alive again. The following morning, Mary Williams, Betty's mother, was making breakfast when she noted that it was a little bit odd that her daughter had not yet come down to eat breakfast and leave for school. So she went upstairs and found that Betty was not in her bed. So she was a little confused and thought, okay, maybe she left early for school. So she contacted the school and found that Betty had never arrived at school. So naturally she panicked and she called Odessa police in absolute hysterics to report that her 17-year-old daughter, Betty Williams, was missing. So police actually end up going to Betty's school that day, and they start questioning all of Betty's friends and acquaintances, and they did it just like they did in the movies. I never knew that this was actually a thing. I've never been in this situation, so I don't know if they still do it this way, but they literally like called each of them into the principal's office at school and started to question them. And in doing this, this is how they found that friend, the friend that Betty had been with the night before, who told police that the last time he saw her is when she had jumped into Mac Herring's truck at around 10:30 or 11 the night before, and he hadn't seen her since. So police think they're onto something because they're like, oh, ex-boyfriend's the last one to see her. Now she's missing. We should probably talk to this ex-boyfriend. And they call Mac in and they're like, yo, where's Betty? We know that you were the last person to see her, so where is she? So Mac told police that he'd been with Betty. He picked her up, the two hung out, and then he drove her home and he dropped her off in front of her house at midnight. He says that he then drove away. He did not wait for her to get inside, which, listen. Always wait for your friends to get inside. Always walk your friends to their car. Always make sure that they're in their car with the doors locked, and drive away before you walk away from your friends. It doesn't apply in this case, but I just think it's an important lesson, if you do not already do that, to be the friend that does that. I am the friend that does that. I will walk you to your car. I will wait until you leave. I will make sure that you text me when you get home, and if you don't text me when you get home to let me know that you got there alive, I will panic. Police did not really believe Mac's story though, so they actually took him out of the school and they took him to the police station to question him further. And after about an hour of being interrogated, Mac turned to his father. His father, because he was a minor, was there with him during the questioning, and he confessed to killing Betty Williams. So he led police officers to his father's hunting property that was about 25 miles outside of town, and showed them where he had killed Betty. And as they started to, walk through the area and come upon a stock tank, they noticed that the entire ground was covered in blood. And a stock tank, if you're not familiar, because I was not familiar, I had to Google it. It appears to be like a really, really large, it almost looks like an above ground pool, but it's made of like metal, and it's what's used to water livestock, stock tank. And Mac said that Betty was inside this stock tank, weighted down with weights. But I also saw it reported that she was in a pond, and I couldn't find photos of the actual crime scene to tell which it was, but either way, she was submerged in water. So police then did something which I found to be very strange, and this is how it was reported though, so I guess this is how it happened, but they asked Mac to get in this water and to retrieve Betty's body, and he did, which is just super, super weird. But that's what happened. So he got in the water and he went under and he found her body and he drug her to the surface by her feet. When police got her body completely out of the water, they found that her head was mostly completely missing. And this didn't seem to bother Mac. Going into the water and retrieving her dead body didn't seem to bother Mac. And him describing to police what had happened the night before didn't seem to bother Mac. Mac told police that on the night of March 21st, 1961, he went and he picked up Betty, and the two of them drove the 30 minutes or so out to his father's hunting property with the sole intention of Mac killing Betty per Betty's request. Mac says that Betty was in good spirits and kept talking about how happy she was going to be when she was dead and how awesome heaven was going to be. Mac says that the two parked his car next to the stock tank and they sat in the car and talked for a while before getting out and walking down towards the water. He says that she was shivering and he was holding a 12-gauge shotgun. He says that Betty asked him for a kiss to remember him by, and the two kissed, and then he went to raise the gun and she took the barrel and put it to her temple, and then he pulled the trigger and blew off her head with a 12-gauge shotgun blast at point-blank range. So Mac was arrested and the news spread quickly, and the response from the community was honestly shameful. People were shocked that one of their own could do something so terrible. People started to say horrible things about Betty, how she was a fast girl, a slut, a manipulator, how she was no good and had tricked Mac into killing her. They made her the bad guy. People were rallying behind Mac and supporting Mac and saying if he did do it, he must have had a good reason. And this just seems so wild to me because this guy, bro, he shot her head off. Shot her head off because she asked him to. He couldn't just be like, nah, dog, that's not for me. But apparently she forced him, so that's just crazy. That's fucking crazy to me. I'm sorry, but no. So this is clearly first-degree murder, right? He planned this killing even if he did do it because she asked. He brought the gun, he brought the ammo, he brought the rope, he brought the weights, and then he shot her in the head. And this would have been such an intense shooting. Think about it, a shotgun to her temple. It would have been so gnarly. And then he weighted her headless body down in water. And then when police asked him about it, he was unmoved and unremorseful and didn't seem affected, which is it's weird. And I saw it reported in an article that when Mac was talking to police about Betty, he described her as a cat laying in a muddy street in the rain. What? So, even though this seems like a pretty straightforward first-degree murder, right? Mac's family got an attorney, and the attorney that they got was like a really, really good attorney. He was known as like a wonder boy and had not yet lost any of his criminal cases. So this attorney decided that his method for getting Mac off as not guilty of this crime was claiming that Mac was temporarily insane at the time that he committed a murder. Now, I read that at this time in Texas law, if you were able to prove that you were temporarily insane at the time of the murder, you would just essentially be found, you know, you wouldn't even stand trial for your crime, and you would just essentially be free, which I don't know if it's still like that or what. It seems super weird to me, and I don't think I've ever actually heard of that. So if anybody knows any Texas law officials out there, let us just know. Anyways, to a lot of people's surprise, the judge actually granted the defense this pre-trial hearing to determine whether or not Mac was temporarily insane at the time of the murder. And this was like a big deal, and the courtroom was like packed with people who just wanted to like be there to see it happen, and packed with like girls who were obsessed with Mac. They called them Mac girls. He had groupies like Richard Ramirez. It is so gross. And during this hearing, they actually used that letter that Betty had written for Mac, the one that, you know, cleared him of any liability. They used this at trial, and the defense attorney essentially said that Betty had become their best witness for the defense, which is just so sad. And her family, man, her poor family was there during all of this and had to hear all of this. The defense actually had the burden of proof here in this pretrial hearing, not the prosecution like it would be in a normal criminal trial. So the defense brought forward several witnesses who could speak to Mac's character, and he brought forward students who Betty had actually asked for them to kill her as well. They brought forward a psychiatrist who testified for the defense that Mac was temporarily insane and believed that by killing Betty, he was actually helping her. He was doing what he thought would help her and what he believed at the time was right, but that it was just temporarily insane and temporarily insanity. And that if he was let out now, everything would be fine. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. He was cool. He was good to be in society. Just at that time, he was temporarily insane. In the end, it was determined that Mac was temporarily insane at the time that he killed Betty, and the crowd roared, and Mac started to cry, and people ran over to him to like hug him and support him and be there for him. And while all this is happening, Betty's parents snuck out the back and avoided that whole circus. The prosecution was not satisfied with this result. Obviously, how could they be? And the prosecutor actually ended up appealing this decision with the Texas Supreme Court on the grounds that the judge who granted the trial in the first place did not have the authority to do so. In 1962, the Supreme Court actually did agree with the prosecution, and the judgment was vacated, and it was ordered that there would be a new trial. Mac would stand trial for the murder of Betty, and double jeopardy wasn't an issue in this case because the initial trial was not to determine his innocence or his guilt, just his mental capacity during the time of the crime. So the second trial started, and it was moved to another place far away because they wanted to try to ensure that Mac could get a fair trial. And even though the trial was moved so far away, the defense had no trouble getting that courthouse packed with supporters of Mac and witnesses for Mac, and the witnesses that they had were strong. The prosecution did everything they could, which it's still wild to me that their case wasn't stronger because it just seems so straightforward, but they were never able to determine a motive. And though you do not need a motive to convict somebody of murder, it definitely helps the jury to have a reason. Even though it's not necessary to have a reason, having a reason helps them see a full picture and understand why a person would do this. And without having a reason, they thought that he was just insane. And they tried to like go with the jealousy as a reason because Betty had parked with his friend, but when they put that friend on the stand, he was like, yeah, no, Mac was cool with it. Me and Mac talked about it, and we realized that like our friendship was too important, and Mac didn't really care. So that did not help the defense the prosecution. And in the end, John Mac Herring was found not guilty, and he was free. The aftermath of this crime is the part that gets super weird, because I feel like you'd imagine that there'd be a lot of sad people, a lot of sad students, that the school would bring in counselors to like help people deal with it, that John would be, there'd be a bad stigma around him, and that there'd be a gray cloud that followed him everywhere he went. None of this happened though. Instead of John being seen in a negative light and kind of ostracized, he was celebrated and he was embraced and he was sort of babied, and Betty's memory was tarnished and people had nothing but negative things to say about her. Even adults in the community had bad things to say about her, calling her just like trash and saying that he did what he did because she forced him and made him and it was all her fault. And that is just so incredibly frustrating to me. John stayed in Texas after all was said and done. John Mac Herring stayed in Texas after all was said and done, and he ended up going to the Texas Tech University, and he had several jobs in the area over his years on this planet, and in the last like 2 decades of his life, he worked as an electrician. I think he owned his own company. John Mac Herring married a couple of times, but, you know, neither time worked out, and he just like stayed in the area, and it was super weird because Betty's family was also in the area, so occasionally her family members, her cousins, would see him around, and it would just piss them off every time to just see him out there living his life totally consequence-free. John Mac Herring died on Saturday, January 5th, 2019, at the age of 75. I tried to find his cause of death, but I couldn't find it anywhere for you, unfortunately. But yeah, he just died about 2 years ago. Apparently, since Betty's death, for those of you who like the spooky shit, they say that her spirit haunts the auditorium of Odessa High School. So her memory has sort of become an urban legend of sorts in the area. It got so bad that the school actually ended up painting the windows of the auditorium to stop from all the headlights blazing through at all hours of the night. Apparently, the legend is that if you park across the street from the school and you shine your headlights into the auditorium windows, honk your horn, and chant Betty's name, you will see her spirit passing in front of the windows of the auditorium. And to this day, many people do believe that Betty Williams' spirit does haunt the grounds of Odessa High School, which wouldn't be that far-fetched if ghosts exist for her to do such a thing, considering all the people there were such dicks to her and tarnished her memory so badly after she died. And that, my friends, is the story of the kiss and kill murder, the murder of 17-year-old Betty Williams. What do you think? I think it is terribly sad and upsetting and frustrating. I don't know how to explain it. It's just I feel very, very upset about it. And it's just such a complicated situation. Her asking people over and over to kill her and her asking Mac to kill her, I do believe that that's true. I think she did that. I think that she went with him that night knowing that, you know, that was like in the back of her mind. But I don't really think she actually believed he would do it. And even if she did, he had the opportunity to say no. Like, it takes a very special type of mind to be able to be convinced to do something like that. Like, you could not convince me to do that. I'd be like, no, let's go take you to therapy. Let's go to a therapist. And while we're there, I'll see him too. You know, like, you're not going to be able to convince me to blow your head off with a shotgun. You're just not. And I guess that could suggest that maybe he was temporarily insane at the time, because, like, how does a sane person do what he did? And then, like, he didn't seem to have any violence in him, and there's nothing that was reported that happened afterwards. So, I mean, I guess it does sort of suggest that, but it's just so hard to believe that she could convince him. And like, what did she do that made him temporarily insane? Like, what could cause that? You know, I don't know. It's just kind of weird. There are passages online that I read from Betty's cousin. Betty's cousin wrote a book about her called Washed in Blood. His name is Shelton Williams. If you're curious, you can look into it. And he has said that he doesn't believe that Betty ever actually wanted to die. He said that Betty's father would often joke about killing himself, and that Betty was just very similar to her father in that regard. And even if she was serious, she was only 17 years old, you know, and like, it seems to me from what I read that her depression was brought on by outward sources. And I'm not going to sit here and say that depression's not a big deal and it's not a bitch, because man, suffering from depression is a bitch. But this didn't seem to be like a long-standing mental illness with her. It didn't seem like something that she suffered with long-term. It just seemed like something that she was going through, and it sounds to me like she could have worked through it, but she didn't get the opportunity to do so. And that's what's so frustrating. And I feel like a big reason the outcome of this case was what it was had a lot to do with who Mac was to the community at large, and who Betty was perceived to be to the community at large. Because Betty was not the average girl. She was seen as different and weird and unconventional, and, you know, and not in a way that would have been favored during that time. And let's just say let's just call it what it is. It's not an unheard of thought that, like, a nice, respectable, well-educated, football-playing, white kid get some leniency from time to time when getting into trouble. And in general, with Betty not being seen in the best light, the community as a whole would have an easier time relating to someone like Mac than someone like Betty. And I just feel like if it happened now, that wouldn't be the case, and maybe he would not have gotten away with it. But then again, maybe, you know, maybe he would have. Maybe they wouldn't want to ruin his wonderful football career like Brock Turner. And it's just so sad, dude, because 17 is so young to die, and she never really got a chance to, like, have a life. And if Mac Herring was temporarily insane when he did this, the weight of what he did had to have just completely ruined his life. Like, I don't see how, unless he really wanted to do this, how you could be okay after that. So essentially 2 lives would have been ruined here. One, obviously far worse than the other, but the decisions were made and they cannot be unmade. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope that it was informative and interesting and gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Betty with me today, because I do think that she is worth remembering. And of course, I hope you enjoyed watching this video and enjoyed what I'm putting out into the world, because I put out into the world what I would like to see. So of course, I want you to enjoy it as well. Please let me know of any cases you would like to see me cover in the future, because as you see, I have a long, long list of cases, and every single time you give me a suggestion, I add it to the list, I put your name next to it so I can give you a little shout out, as I know that you're filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you have not yet, make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell, because I put out a new Morbid makeup video every single week and I would love to hang out with you. And if you want to talk and hang out more consistently, you can follow me on both Instagram and Twitter. I am on both of those platforms way too much. And anyways, guys, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That's tight. You're tight. Please, for the love of God, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you in my next video.